Election Briefing. I'm Rachel Lazar, the Deputy Director of the Religious Action Center, and I will be moderating this afternoon. In the next 45 or so minutes, we'll hear from our three experts on what Tuesday's election results mean for Jews in our country and for the country as a whole. We have on video with us today Michael Horowitz, Nancy Zirkin, and our own Rabbi David Saperstein. Michael Horowitz is a senior advisor for the Religious Action Center, working on common ground strategies, including human rights and religious liberty issues. Just as we have diversity in the viewpoints of our congregants across the nation, it is important for us at the RAC to have diversity in our own thought process and approach. And we can always count on Michael Horowitz to offer a constructive critique of the progressive viewpoint of the RAC. Michael has served as General Counsel for the Office of Management and Budget under the Reagan administration, and following that spent nearly 2 decades as the head of the Religious Liberty Project at the Hudson Institute, where he put together remarkable strange bedfellow coalitions that, with the RAC's involvement, passed the International Religious Freedom Act, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which created the State Department Human Trafficking Office, and logged a number of other successful victories during the Bush and Obama administration. Michael made all of that happen. Nancy Zirkin is the Executive Vice President and Director of Policy at the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights, or LCCHR, and the Leadership Conference on Education Fund. Since 1971, has worked to advocate public policy that improves the lives of all people by promoting the civil and constitutional rights that they have, and equity in education and in the workplace for women and girls and all people. The LCCHR is the broadest coalition through which the URJ and the CCAR does much of its work, and national leadership has been indispensable to the success of an array of civil rights issues we care about most. And most of you know Rabbi David Saperstein, now serving in his 40th year as the Religious Action Center's director. So starting with you, David, can you each take a few minutes to share with us your general thoughts and takeaways from Tuesday's results?
Let me start with just a brief overview of some of the data that may be interesting for our viewers here. First, riding a wave of discontent across the country, Republicans achieved major victories in these elections at almost every level of politics. I want to focus for a moment on the breakdown on religious grounds and in terms of the what the Jewish vote did and what this means to the Jewish community. So first, Protestants, you can divide the American electorate religiously by denominations or by religiosity. So first, by the faith group they identify with. Protestants voted 59% for Republicans in this election. Catholics, for the national election, House and Senate races. Catholics, 51%. White evangelical Protestants, 77%. Those with no religion voted 70% Democratic. If you do it by religiosity, which pollsters tell us is actually a more accurate read, those who go to church once a week or more, 56% of them voted Republican. But 69% of white evangelicals voted Republican. Of those who never go to church, 63% voted Democrat, and 69% of the white grouping of those who go to church or synagogue not at all voted Democratic. This changes a bit when you look at the African American community. African American community, which is one of the most religious by all measures of their attitudes towards the Bible, regularity of worship, etc. The African American community votes overwhelmingly, 86% or so, even amongst those who go regularly, once a week or more to church for Democratic candidates. The youth vote, very interesting. In 2014, it comprised 13% of the electorate. That's similar to the last off-year election, 11% of the electorate in 2010. In 2012, it was 19% of the electorate. That was an enormous difference in what happened this year. And it broke 54% Democratic. 37% of whites, millennials voted for Democrats. 64% of Hispanic millennials voted for Democratic candidates. 86% of black millennials voted for Democratic candidates. So what's interesting is the Republicans actually picked up a bit, about 5 percentage points over last time amongst the youngest, the 18 to 24-year-olds. And what it says is that, and this is an observation of Dan Counsel at Public Religion and Research Institute, that those who were born who came to voting patterns in the second term of the Bush administration still remain solidly Democratic. Those who began to vote in the Obama administration, there's been a shift towards Republicans. Not a great one, but a noticeable shift towards Republicans in those votes. Conservative Christians have claimed great success for this election, the outcome of this election. They mobilized. We had a record number of conservative evangelical pastors who publicly were endorsing candidates for the pulpit in protest of the IRS restrictions, saying you can't. They argue that it's an infringement on free exercise of religion to be told what they can and cannot do in the pulpit. The IRS says you can do whatever you want, just can't get tax exemptions if you want to endorse candidates. And there's been a flagrant, growingly flagrant violation of these rules by an organized effort of evangelical pastors to endorse candidates from the pulpit. The IRS has not been cracking down on it, and it'll be interesting to see this time when it's gone 2 elections ago to 39 on one Sunday that did it to 600 who openly did it this year, whether or not the IRS finally will begin to take action in this regard. Of course, it should be noted that that deeply conservative states had the majority of the Senate elections that were up, that have very dense conservative Christian populations. Arkansas, North Carolina, Georgia, amongst other states. That's true in the northern parts of Florida. So this was an election in which they did have a significant influence. It remains to be seen what happens. I would point out that millennials, again, the 18 to 29-year-old group, only 10% of all millennials identify as evangelicals, where 23% of those between the ages of 50 and 64 identify as millennials. So what the implications will be with the shrinking percentage of younger people identifying millennials remains to be seen. In terms of the Jewish vote, the Jewish vote polled in at 69%, according to J Street, the Dovish group on Israel, in a poll that they commissioned, and 65%, according to the Republican Jewish Coalition of Jews voted Democratic. Again, way out of proportion, higher than any other non-Caucasian group in America, identifiable group in America. The Latino community, in which Republicans picked up a few points compared to the last election, still votes overwhelmingly Democratic, and again in the high 80s, low 90s for the African American community as well. I thought it would be interesting to see some of that. We did have a replacement for Eric Cantor, who had been the lone Jewish Republican member of the House of Representatives, with Lee Zeldin on Long Island picking up a seat. Now is again the lone Republican Jewish member. The overall numbers remained about static. The 2 Jewish senators who were up for election this time both won. There was a loss of 1 or 2 of the House members, Jewish House members of the Senate as well. In terms of what happened in the outcome of the vote, I'm just going to take a minute to talk about a little bit of what happened on the referenda on the state level, and then turn it over to Nancy to pick up on this. So there were three areas of state referenda that were very active. One was marijuana votes in 3 states, all 3 of which approved measures to decriminalize or make legal the legalization of marijuana. In the question of minimum wage, there were a group of states and a large group of cities who picked up votes in terms of raising significantly the minimum wage. In the end, 2 of them, Alaska and South Dakota, increased the minimum wage and tied it to cost of living increases. 2 other states, first of all, California had 3 cities, and Wisconsin had 9 counties and 4 cities in their states that did it. But 2 other states, Illinois and Alaska, had minimum wage raises that were not tied to the cost of living. This was a major achievement, and obviously there is as well here a series of votes that that took place as well on criminal justice more broadly. Interesting, California passed a very comprehensive effort to have a far more rational system of sentencing, and hopefully that will be a model for sentencing changes across the country. It enjoyed bipartisan support, which is always a country, as did bail reform in New Jersey. So there have been some significant changes there as well. Because of the more Republican Senate and House now, it is likely that the president will face some real challenges on its foreign policy agenda over the issue of Iran and the agreement over the nuclear development in Iran that the president is seeking. He's going to have to bring a proposal that clearly is going to pass bipartisan muster in order to have it approved by the Congress of the United States. It is likely that there will be efforts to have far more robust efforts targeted at ISIS, or even getting involved through airstrikes or a no-fly zone in Syria. There will be proposals that will be sent to the president in these areas. So there are some foreign policy implications that have to be looked at as well. And finally, in terms of climate change, this is also a challenge for those who are deeply committed to an assertive response to climate change. Senator Inhofe, who has expressed repeated skepticism about whether there is really climate change, and certainly human interaction with it, will be chairing a pivotal environment committee. On the other hand, Lisa Murkowski, Republican senator from Alaska, who has talked about climate change as a very serious challenge, will be chairing the energy committee. So it'll be interesting to watch compromises between 2 wings of the Republican Party on these issues of climate change as well. With that, Nancy, I will turn it over to you to pick up on civil rights, women's rights, and other themes.
I'm an old vote counter, so I'm going to start off with the actual numbers that we have. I'm sure you all have seen it. It looks like the House will lose 15 seats. The Senate, Democrats, I'm sorry, since 66% of us voted for Democrats, I assume. And in the Senate, it looks like it's going to be 46. Awful lot change, 9 seats. It is going to be tough for the issues about which we all care. However, as David said, there were indications in the election that some of the policies are supportive. Minimum wage, criminal justice, Medicare, Social Security, paycheck fairness, student loans, issues that I think the Republicans are going to have to pay attention to in terms of 2016. And so that I am hopeful that there are a number of issues that we can get done. Mitch McConnell, at least yesterday, as well as the president, had very conciliatory remarks that he wants to work with the Democrats. I think he has to. He has to show that they can function and govern, not just blow up. They're here now, and we all ought to remember this because I think we all know it. In 2009, Mitch McConnell went to the floor and said that he was going to stop everything that Obama did, period. And I thought, and most other people thought, that they would be labeled obstructionist. Well, apparently he's smarter than all of us because Harry Reid is labeled the obstructionist. And Harry Reid, without belaboring it, didn't want to put his caucus in a bad position. So bottom line is they are here, and it's going to be a tough Congress. But I think there are at least 3 issue areas that are hopeful, and we've heard utterings about these areas from McCarthy in the House, who took Eric Cantor's House seat, and others in the Senate. And the first is transportation and infrastructure. We view this as a civil rights issue because it ties into workers' rights. How do folks get to work? How do underserved populations get better representation in these good-paying jobs that build roads and bridges and really help our economy? We are working on this with Policy Link and whole caucus to reauthorize the transportation bill. In criminal justice, that has been bipartisan over the last several years. Especially around sentencing reform, we are trying to improve and get some people off of sentencing in terms of eliminating areas and categories. We were fairly successful this year in making it bipartisan. Lee was supportive with Utah, Rand Paul was, and several others. Cornyn has different ideas, but he wants this done in some fashion. We don't agree with the fashion, but hopefully we can make it work. And there's also bipartisan interest in re-entry. There will be a reauthorization of the Second Chance Act, which looks to people coming out of prison, how to employ them. That has bipartisan support. And of course, as David cited earlier, minimum wage. We are very hopeful of getting that passed. We will continue to press for the Voting Rights Act, for immigration rights, even though we know that the president is going to be issuing an administrative plan later this year, and we don't know. So I can stop there and I can take any other questions later. Thank you very much.
Nancy. Michael, your turn.
As a good conservative, my wife, just like I said, most of all, Michael, no gloating. I'll try that. The thing that I thought was most interesting about the election was the quality of the candidates. I looked at the Republicans elected. I see people like Tom Cotton, Ben Sasse, Sullivan of Alaska, Perdue of Georgia, who was not supported by the Chamber of Commerce, Jody Ernst of Iowa, Neil Lowell, Stefanik, Carl DeMeo, a gay Republican. Sally, a gay pilot. Will Hurd, an African American. They're extraordinary people. They're young, they're bright, they live lives outside of politics, and they're going to make their mark. They're going to work with some of the really solid Republicans, like Johnson of Wisconsin, Hooker of Tennessee, and Kelly of New Hampshire. I think there will be debate within the Republican Party, debate within the Republican Party between the Rand Paul libertarians and the more traditional conservatives will be one of the most interesting debates, in some respects as important as the debate between progressives and conservatives. But just as the Republican Party is unloading our old bulls, Roberts of Kansas is a perfect example. It seems to me that the Democratic candidates are the same tired old class. They're tort lawyers. They're people who are dependent on labor unions. David is just squirming as I talk, as I look at poor my dear friend David on the screen. These are really quality people. Now, that's not true, and there are academics, indeed, of the far left, the idea of Elizabeth Warren as the great model for progressives. That's a pretty tricky road to go down if the Democratic Party wants to win elections. Or frankly, from my perspective, policies that work. There are some extraordinary Democrats. I think Muriel Bowser, elected as mayor of D.C. I want to see if progressives do to her what they did to Adrienne Fenty and call her not black enough. I think she's a good candidate. In some respects, among the 2 or 3 most interesting candidates are now Governor Raimondi, a young, bright Rhodes Scholar who took on the unions on pension costs that it will sink and bankrupt Rhode Island. She was opposed by the unions, and it was the Republican who was supported, and she won. I don't see many candidates like Raimondi, and I think that is going to be very, very problematic for progressives in the Democratic Party. What are these young Republicans like? The main thing I think is they sound like my grandfather. They talk about America as the blessed land, and they really feel it. You can see some tear up as they talk about America. When you mention Lincoln thinking of America as the world's last best hope, this is really embedded in them as it was in my grandfather, as it was in Hubert Humphrey, as it was in John Kennedy, as it was in Tom Lantos, and as I do not see it in many progressives, and surely not the candidates and many of the elected Democrats. I think that's a long-term problem and a structure of progressives and Democrats. I think the Republican candidates and the conservative candidates reject gender politics, reject racial politics. When I see the female candidates here, the first thing on the Republican side, the first thing they say is, I'm a woman, don't vote for me on that ground. I mean it. Vote for me if you like my policies. I think the African Americans, Scott, a black senator from South Carolina, they all say the same thing, and they reject the kind of gender politics that I think much of the country rejects as indeed, and I think as indeed one of the core reasons why the president is in such tough shape. The second thing that's going to happen is that there's going to be a very different kind of social welfare, tikkun olam kind of calculus in politics. I think there will be a rejection of redistribution of income as the mode basis on which politics and social welfare policy will be judged, and much more on economic growth. I think there will be less of a function on survey. The Great Society model rejects the New Deal model and says, don't give money to poor people, give money to teachers and social workers and home builders and hospitals and the like. Ultimate trickle-down politics, billions of dollars going to people like us in the name of the poor. It hasn't worked as one looks at the statistics. I think so there will be a lot of suspicion and a lot of rejection of that as progressives. I think mistakenly, politically as well as on policy terms, call that an assault on the poor. I think there will be much more suspicion, obviously, of government, and heaven knows the record of government on Obamacare and on the delivery of services has been terrible, and much more of a focus on the private sector's ability to do it. But let me say the critical thing. I think there will be much less of a focus and a rejection of the notion of input as the measure, much more on outcome. Rather than being able to say, you don't care about blacks, you don't care about the poor, because you voted for a cut in section 72.C, we're going to be talking about, and Republicans who are elected are going to be talking about output. And I wish progressives joined them. So there won't be dollar levels of support. It will be issues like, and you're going to hear a lot about this in the new Congress, black male participation in the workforce, illegitimacy rates, crime rates, the collapse of the inner cities. David talked about African Americans as being so profoundly religious. That's not true of the young people in the inner cities, and there will be a focus on that. As David said, I think there will be a much more robust foreign policy, a much stronger support of Israel. I think there will be a greater focus on what progressives used to care about. Tony Blair really hit the mark. He said, you know, if progressives were progressives, they'd be marching the streets about the gulags of North Korea. Instead, people like Joe Biden have been leading the parade to de-emphasize the human rights aspect. If only we could get North Korea to agree to drop its nuclear weapons, why, we will effectively legitimize them. I think there are many of these Republicans who will be focused, as Democrats used to be focused, on the issue of the gulags of North Korea. And they will be unembarrassed in calling it the evil empire. I think there will be as well, in terms of that foreign policy, I said there is this innate love of America as and the focus on the goodness of America rather than our failings. I think one must focus on both, but it's a question of how one sees that glass. There is and will be a rejection in the politics of America of what President Obama said. When somebody asked, do you think America is the greatest country? His response was, yes, I do, but French think France is the greatest country. Italians think Italy is the greatest country. I think if the thinking of progressives, I think progressives are in for shellackings at the polls, just like they faced this time. What I think, and let me come to the core of, well, let me just a couple of things. Obamacare. Obamacare is finished, not because Republicans are going to pass a repeal act which the president vetoes, but because there's a case headed up the courts in which a statute which says you can only give subsidies to people living in states which have federal exchanges. What the government has done, what the administration has done, is give subsidies to people in states and state exchanges. You can dance around that all you want, but I think there will be at least a 6-3 vote here, which is going to kick up premiums in state after state in more than half of the American population. That alone will sink Obamacare. Just as a plain reading of the statute, and I think that's going to happen next year. I also think that there will be enormous increases in premiums, which will sink Obamacare, and I think there will be a great debate, and a healthy debate. We're not going to have a vote on a straight bipartisan basis in a lamed-up Congress of a 2,000-page bill. There will be fewer 2,000-page bills. And I can tell you, as somebody who lived in the government, one, progressives and conservatives ought to reject 2,000-page bills just without even looking at them. Those bills are filled with special privilege and all kinds of fixes that don't work. Let me get to the critical thing from my point of view.
Michael,
Yeah.
I would have time to have some back and forth as well here. So,
What's that?
He's going to wrap
Wrapped up. Yes. No, I will. Let me wrap up. As I counted, there's 14 minutes on the progressive side. Give me 30 more seconds or so, and I want to get to, because I want to get to the central issue. I will say that, and this gets to it, I think there will be a challenge of the 100-year-old caricature that says progressives care for the vulnerable and the poor, and conservatives at best are indifferent. That's not the elected Republicans I see. That's not the churches I see, the evangelical churches, which are every bit as much into Tikkun Olam as Reformed Jews. And I work with those communities, having been very instrumental in the legislation that dealt with worldwide Christian persecution. So one of the things that's going to happen, and one of the challenges here, will be whether progressives think they can get away with the old script of we're on God's side and we're on the caring side while conservatives are not. I am a political conservative who served in the Reagan administration with the same measure of moral passion as I was the teacher of the first integrated classes at the University of Mississippi Law School, as I am fighting for human rights. And interestingly, I find more conservatives like Frank Wolf and Chris Smith caring about those issues. Now that Paul Wellstone's gone, Tom Lantos is gone, it's not there on the progressive side.
Thank you, Michael. Let me stop here just because I want to thank you. This was wonderful. I would like to give David and or Nancy a chance to react.
Go ahead with where you wanted to go next on this.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think we began to hit on this one, but I think I'll give you all a stab at it again. We have the opportunity now for passage of anything that can be bipartisan. So where do you think, if you all had to list two types of bills, which are the two that you think have the best chance of going through this Congress?
Descriptively now, not what we would want, but descriptively, realistically.
That's right. Where are the best odds? Two things.
Fair Sentencing Act and minimum wage. I have three, and the transportation reauthorization.
Okay.
Michael, you have a thought?
Yes, I think there will be some human rights issues that will come up. I think there will be an initiative on tearing down the internet firewalls and the world's dictatorship. I think the question is, who will take the lead on that? I think it will pass on a bipartisan basis, but that's an issue up for ownership, and one doesn't know whether progressives will get back to where they have historically been, or whether the Republicans will seize ownership of a lot of these human rights issues. I think school vouchers is going to come up because one of the things of this election was a total rejection of public employee unions and their control of government institutions. And I think Democrats up for re-election 2 years from now are going to be mighty, mighty concerned about being tagged with and as down-the-line supporters of public employee unions and teachers unions.
So, David,
I think there will be some good stuff and progress made, some bargaining on vouchers and private schools.
David, let me bring you into this. What do you think? What are your two or three things?
Of course, in California, it was a different result on unions than it was elsewhere. So we still have the divides over the unions that seems to one of the fissures in American life that marks these times that we're living in. I really, look, I don't know what's going to happen when the president begins to move with administrative action on immigration reform and climate change. Seems to me that those are the two big pieces in which the president has indicated he's going to continue to do using the authority that is vested to him as he defines it. Republicans saying no, he's exceeding his authority. He's going to move assertively on both environmental protections and in terms of some of the concerns about immigration reform that are within his power, holding deportations, for example, for certain categories of people, as he's done before with the Dreamers. In the past, a lot of the policies that he's doing has had bipartisan support. It'll be interesting to see whether or not the support for the policies outweighs the divisiveness over executive action on these issues. But I remain hopeful because I think immigration reform and climate change are two of the more urgent issues that we truly have to deal with in this country. And I agree on the things that Michael just said and Nancy said as well. I suspect on some of the specific things, the Ebola funding, the Ebola funding that the president has asked for to put some billions of dollars into helping really curtail this epidemic in Africa, I suspect we'll get a large measure of bipartisan support as well. So it will be an interesting time. I would just be mindful of the fact that the last set of presidents, President Bush, President Clinton, President Reagan, in their second terms, all faced a real political weakness at exactly this time in their terms, and all did some extraordinary things in the last years. So I think it is possible to get the support.
David, yes, of course all presidents have weakness in their 60 years. But this president has lost more members of the House of Representatives than any in modern history. The Republicans have a larger total vote in Congress than any time in the last 125 years. That's the doing of this highly unpopular president. And you pointed to these executive orders. I've got to tell you, that's going to be one of the big issues. If the president thinks he's going to rule by stroke of the pen and executive orders, and have his lawyers say, well, there's a statute that's got a deadline, but we'll ignore that statute, I think there will be a rule of law question that's going to clobber the Democrats. I say this as somebody who was general counsel at OMB during the Reagan administration. I issued orders that gave the president heartburn. I got applauded by the Iran-Contra independent counsel for blocking Ali's army because I found a statute that said the anti-Contra war couldn't be fought from the White House. I don't see that from the lawyers in this administration. And if he wants to think he's going to be able to rule just by his stroke of the pen, I think that's going to be a...
The only real question is whether or not he's doing this is one in the authority that is permissible to him. And I think there are very strong arguments that there are, and there are clearly arguments on the other side. It'll probably end up being litigated, and it'll be decided by the courts.
I've talked to lawyers.
I don't think it's quite the slam dunk. Nancy, you wanted to
yeah, let me just talk about the lame duck and what is going to happen there, I think. There will be a big push to confirm all of the judicial nominations pending. That's about 24. Including a lot of Republican nominees, let me say this, out of Texas, etc. There will be a push to confirm ambassadors. As many people know, most of the ambassadors that have been waiting forever are Korean. So that is a push. The Department of Defense reauthorization has to be done. They have to fund the government. The current funding expires December. So that's either going to be an omnibus bill, which is all 13 or all 12 appropriations, or it will be a continuing resolution with this year's level.
Nancy, I will say that one area where there's been extraordinary progress, that is the LGBT agenda. It's hard to see in this Congress that we will not have hit a plateau for this Congress in the congressional level. There is bipartisan support for many of the provisions, the employment non-discrimination provision, and other pieces of this. It's really hard to see that that's going to have further progress. I suspect that state that same-sex marriage and employment discrimination issues will continue to expand. Those protections will expand. Is that your sense?
I do not see either McConnell or Boehner taking on their right-wing members on these issues. I believe that they will take them on tax, on trade, which they've already said, and on other business issues. That's why Republican establishment fought hard not to have the Tea Party crazy in there, and they succeeded.
And not only that, they intentionally sought diversity amongst many candidates. We have gay candidates and African American candidates and women candidates in the Republican Party, in Latino candidates in an effort to show a more diverse face, and it will be interesting to see the impact and how some of these very articulate, very talented people, many of them very young, in the Republican Party, space, what impact it will have as the Republican Party moves forward as well.
I do believe, David, that in several years, because of the acceptance of gay marriage, whether they accept it or not, it's in the states. And because of this, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act will be viewed differently. It's not going to happen.
No.
But it
won't come back in exactly the same form. Probably a religious exemption much closer to Title VII.
Exactly.
Applies to other civil rights law rather than the broader form that you have for
exactly.
Can I intervene in this optimistic notion that the world hasn't really changed? I think the world's changed quite fundamentally. And I will say that if the response to progressives and Democrats is stroke of the pen executive orders, lame duck, last-minute passages of things, the reaction against the Democratic Party will be real, structural, profound, and long-lasting. You're going to have to enter into a real debate and not do things in the way you're talking about. That's more important. It ought to be more important to progressives than getting this law passed or that law passed. And David, let me just say, again, in terms of racial politics, in terms of the kind of quota-oriented statutes, as most Americans would see them, and frankly, as I see them in many respects, the fact that there are Hispanic and African-American candidates doesn't mean they support them. Indeed, they will be among the leaders in opposing some of the traditional race-oriented, gender-oriented, outcome-oriented statutes.
Let me jump in on that, actually. I noticed no one's talked about voting rights. And obviously, voter ID laws were a sort of big item this election, and conservatives thought that they were necessary in order to prevent fraud. Progressives thought that they were actually suppressing minority votes. What's going to happen with the Voting Rights Amendment Act, and how did we fare this election with voting rights?
Here's what happened in the election. In many, many states, and we have documentation, there was confusion, there was disillusionment among the voters. In North Carolina, they don't have a voter ID law, but yet many counties were enforcing it. True in other states as well. What this election pointed to was that we need a Voting Rights Amendments Act, because in the absence of it, all kinds of mischief happened. And I think that certainly Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid, if they are the leaders, and the caucuses will be talking about voting rights. I've already had conversations. Whether we can get it passed or not, I do not know.
And heretofore, it's had bipartisan support.
It has bipartisan support, and as a matter of fact, as Michael well knows, in the 60s, when it was passed originally, it had overwhelmingly bipartisan support. We passed it in 2000. We repassed it in 2006 with huge House and Senate majorities. House was almost 400. Senate was by voice vote. So we are now here at this time in history where it has been gutted. It has led to huge confusion, and we need to refine it and get it back so that it pass muster with the Supreme Court.
Can I comment on that? Just because a law has the same label doesn't mean it's the same law. And that voter ID thing is a perfect example of why voters have been so alienated. I think it contributed mightily to the outcome of this election. The idea that you can't show the driver's license, and indeed with all of the provisions giving you identification. You talked about North Carolina. Somebody went out in North Carolina and went to 20 polling places and gave a false identity and was registered in 19 of them, and the 20th one said, gee, it's not legal, and I maybe better not. At 19 out of 20 places, he was registered in North Carolina, and he got little films of the registrars doing it. Of course there's fraud in election, and I'll tell you what most Americans think when they hear that, at least large numbers of Americans, large enough to win elections, and that is that the Democratic Party thinks the only way it can win is through black voters, Hispanic voters, whatever it takes. Waive laws that allow 4 million people who came in illegally to stay here indefinitely. Allow people to vote without the kind of protection against voter fraud. I'll tell you what happened. I look at American history. Whenever it was, right after the Civil War, we had a Reconstruction period. Blacks voted at the polls, as blacks ought to, as I gave my soul when there was segregation to see that blacks had civil rights. But then there was no guard, and blacks took over governance through the kind of practices that I think many Democrats think is the only way they're going to survive. What happened? We had 120 years of Jim Crow laws. You won't win by waiving voter identification, by waiving immigration laws. You're going to win if your ideas work for poor people, and that's what the debate ought to be. And you're going to win without accusing conservatives of being racists and bigots, because they're not.
Well, let me ask this question to you all.
At some point, Michael, you and I need to have a conversation about voter fraud, because it's an old canard of the Republican Party.
Michael, it is.
President joked just the other day about Chicago being the place where anybody could vote who wanted to. The president made big jokes about voter fraud being widespread in his home state of Chicago. It is widespread there.
Listen, Michael. Here, clearly, I read the same story you did about the North Carolina thing. The question isn't, is it possible to have voter fraud? Here, I mean, that person actually showed an ID, I believe, right? Here, places was able to register in different places. That's a different thing. The question of whether or not such fraud exists, every independent major survey by academic institutions, by others, has shown it is negligible, virtually non-existent. Here, and the cure of all of these rules and regulations so disproportionately disadvantages poorer communities and minority communities, often who live in cities in high concentrations, don't have cars, don't have driver's licenses. You're allowed, you're banned in some of these states to use your university ID, but you can use your gun ID for this, your permission to carry arms. I mean, it really doesn't make sense, Michael, to make the argument in all these studies that it is widespread. Let's listen to the evidence.
We disagree on what you say, but I want to put it in terms of the election. What I'm trying to say is, if the Democrats focus on voter ID and waiving immigration laws instead of black male participation in the workforce, inner city crime, illegitimacy rates, A, they will not serve the minority communities that they care about, and B, they will be seen as trying to stack elections by a majority and an overwhelming majority of the American people. It's not a smart political road to go down, and I happen to think on the merits it's not a right thing to do.
The economic frustration of the majority of Americans, the middle class whose wages and income have been stagnating or falling, the lower classes similarly watching falling percentages of the wealth created in this country. If those structural issues about economic inequality and a sense of hope and opportunity for all people aren't met, then whichever party is held responsible for the failure of that is going to lose at the polls over and over and over again.
You couldn't be more wrong, David, if progressives focus on the disparities of income rather than the fact that the economy is cratering, rather than the fact that deficits are going to cause interest payments to gobble up the whole federal budget so that there won't be money for anything. It's not going to work, and it's not good economic or policy sense for the poor.
Michael, what we disagree
Disparities are not the issue that are going to drive this bus. It is the performance of the economy that will.
Michael, what we disagree on is whether or not we can achieve this economic opportunity and still take steps that have always enjoyed bipartisan support to ensure that every person who is entitled to vote in this country has the opportunity to do it.
David, let me just say in terms of my politics, this will be just one comment. In terms of my politics, I am a hardcore conservative who served the Reagan administration. The basis on which I think my views should be judged is not how wealthy they're going to make the rich, not how comfortable the middle class, but how much hope and opportunity it offers inner city people. And what I'm trying to say about this election is there are lots of conservative, young, bright, caring candidates who got elected who feel as I do. That is the great issue. And to say, and not to focus on what's happening to the inner cities, and to focus on this, or to focus on income inequality, won't help the poor, and is a loser's game politically. That's my full comment.
We'll see about that. I think that the economic inequality thing is of enormous importance to the American people, and the leaders of this country have to address these structural problems as well.
Of course,
Okay,
it's increased during the Obama
wanna-
administration. Income inequality has increased significantly despite the $1 trillion deficits during the Obama administration.
I want to end with one last constructive question, a constructive ending, and then I want to ask for each of you to give the 30-second bottom line of what to expect in the next 2 years. So first, my question. Is there a role for the faith community to play in this next Congress, these next 2 years, that can be constructive? Where is the opportunity here for the faith community? Anyone?
The opportunity is great if progressives understand that evangelical Christians are caring and decent, as David Saperstein bravely does and has for years within the progressive community. There could be great progress
What's an issue?
made.
So what's one issue, for example, for the whole faith community to rally behind?
Well, I think a whole range of human rights issues, like the trafficking of women, like tearing down internet firewalls, like prison reform. There are a range of issues, and who knows? Once they get to talk to each other and the demonization and the caricatures end, they might find that they have lots of common ground on lots of other things.
Okay,
like black male participation in the workforce, for example.
Nancy, David, role for the faith community.
I think we agree, Michael. The issue of sentencing reform, prison reform, all of those issues right now, a huge number of faith organizations are working on. And I think that will bring fruit of passage. There is no question about it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just want all of our viewers to know, with this back and forth, it may appear as though we don't agree on anything here on this broad range of issues that Michael just hinted at. Michael is really one of the heroes of this last generation. He's put together these, as you said, Rachel, these absolutely extraordinary coalitions of liberal religious groups and the most conservative evangelical groups, of liberal Catholics and conservative Catholics, of the Orthodox Jewish community and Reform Jewish community. He's really spearheaded these efforts to mobilize the speaking out on persecuted religious people all across the globe, on really addressing seriously human trafficking, this issue of internet freedom that's so vital. If we can bypass the firewalls, Michael often says, just imagine if there could be a church service. The Vatican was leading for 500 million Catholics across the globe, or for Protestant Christians joining together, or others, even in countries where their rights are being persecuted. Just imagine, how it could begin to transform things. So I really agree with Michael on everything he said. I just want everyone to know how remarkable Michael has been in putting together bipartisan, multi-issue, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multiracial coalitions on these issues that he's talked about. Yeah, I do think on climate change, we're going to find increasingly more and more Republicans joining on these issues. I really hope we do address and big compromises made some aspect of immigration reform and voting rights. Again, I just want to remind people that presidents over and over again in trouble in their 6-year midterm election over and over again have been able to achieve certain extraordinary things. And in almost every case, Michael, it has involved bipartisan compromise and the ability of that president to work with the party that's in power. And whatever the numbers are, that's as true today as it was at the 6th term of all these other presidents that you and I have watched kind of pick up the momentum and up their game and really do remarkable things that have made the world a better place. And that's what I hope for the Republican leaders in this Congress and the new Congress coming up. It's what I hope for the President of the United States.
Well, let me say, if the President signs that executive order that effectively allows 4 million illegal immigrants to stay here, he will not have earned the trust necessary for the bipartisanship on issue after issue. So I'm very hopeful, as are the Republican leaders, that he will not do that. Let me, however, close by returning your compliment, David. If I have done and worked on what I think can fairly, or used to fairly, be called the cat herding business of putting the Southern Baptist Convention and the NAACP together on human rights issues, I would say David's the hero. Because when we first started out on the International Religious Freedom Act, Jewish groups would say, and the real issue was Christian persecution. It was massive. And Jewish groups said, hey, I'm against religious persecution, but don't expect me to go fight for the Christian right. My members pay me to take care of them. And David was the progressive who said, if you're a Jew, you cannot be silent on the issue of persecution of any religious community. And it was David's leadership that brought progressives into this issue. It has been David's leadership with the progressive community that has made progressives willing to work with evangelicals and the dread Christian right and conservatives, even though they knew it might be lending moral legitimacy to conservatives. David said, we'll oppose them when we disagree with them, we will work with them, and he has learned and taught others that this is a country where people really can bridge together right and left and red and blue. David was nominated by the president, as we all know, to be the ambassador for religious freedom. If I would say this, if President Obama nominates nominees like David Saperstein to a variety of jobs, I think there will be a great 2 years. I'm not holding my breath till he does it, unfortunately, but I think if he does, if he takes David as a model, he's going to be a very successful president the last 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just sum up very, very quickly. It's going to be an interesting 2 years. It's going to be interesting whether or not Mitch McConnell and Boehner pass things that actually are getting signed. I have no doubt that they can pass things. I am hopeful that on a number of things that it will result in laws. But unfortunately, it is too early to know how it's going to go. I will tell you that I believe, because the president said it again yesterday, he is going to do the immigration administrative relief. There is no question. He's doing it by the end of the year. That could very well poison the well. I hope not. And, of course, no one knows how he's going to do it, but I think that this administration, having had many conversations on this issue, is sensitive to that. But I think anything he does is going to be received badly.
Well, let's hope that their common ground will be found on this, because the country needs it and the world needs it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you to all of our presenters and also to all of you for taking time to be with us this afternoon. And please visit us at rac.org/vote for a recording of today's presentation and also for other election resources.